hard for Barack Obama to get 4 more years in the White House, if not impossible, if he doesn't win Pennsylvania and Virginia. There is no part of Maryland, and in fact, Howard County, you can be in Virginia or Pennsylvania within an hour from just about anywhere in Maryland, especially here in Howard traffic side. Then we're talking hours. But we've got an opportunity here in Maryland and here in Howard County to really take ownership over this campaign. Alone, we've got 10 electoral votes to give the president. And that's saying something. But combined, if you bring in the 20 from Pennsylvania and the 10 from Maryland and the 13 from Virginia, that makes up 17% of what Barack Obama needs for 4 more years in the White House. That's 17% of the way to 270. And that's what we here in Howard have to be focused on over the next 201 days. Make sure we do everything here at home that we need to do, make sure we build for the future, and make sure that we go into other states. So before I introduce our county executive, I want everybody to take a moment and you may be sitting on it, you may have picked it up, pull out one of these little neon sheets, either orange or yellow. Ready, hold it up. Go ahead and do it. We're not moving on until you do it. Okay, so everybody grab a pen, borrow a pen from somebody else, fill this out. The time for talk is ended, and so tonight we're going to hear about why we need to get this president reelected, why we need Democrats in power in Congress, and then this is where you're signing up to say, I want to take action. On this little sheet of paper, you put your name, your address, your email, your phone number, and then you just check off which of these 3 things you want to attend. Next Tuesday, we're going to be phone banking. Next Saturday, the 28th, we're going to be canvassing in Virginia. We're going to be registering Virginia voters, a state that needs more voters registered because they're doing everything they can to make it hard for people to vote. We're going to go into Virginia, we're going to make sure that we register voters, make sure that we give them an opportunity to vote. And then on May 1st, we're going to be phone banking again. This is going to keep going for the next 201 days. But I encourage everybody to fill this out and then pass it in. At the end of the program, stick around. As soon as the congressman's finished, we're going to do a drawing. And if you check one of these off and enter it in, we're going to give away one of those cool Howard for Obama t-shirts. We're going to give away some of the buttons and things. Yes, we are bribing you for volunteer work. But we're doing it because it matters. What we do over the next 201 days doesn't just impact this fall. It doesn't even just impact the next 4 years. We've got a choice this fall between the path that Barack Obama has taken us on and the path that Mitt Romney and George Bush and John Boehner and his group wants to take us on. And so we've got to make sure that we here in Howard, while we know the president can win here, we're doing everything we can to make sure he wins the state and to make sure that he wins our battleground neighbors. So I want to thank you all for everything that you're doing already. All of the folks that raised their hand, thank you. And I now want to turn it over to a gentleman who, quite frankly, probably needs no introduction here in Howard County. A man who I got to know really well when he was one of the very first major endorsers of Barack Obama way back in 2007 when the campaign was just getting started. Somebody who I know is going to be working with us for the next 201 days. Your county executive, Ken Ulman.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Another round of applause for Jason. He's really doing a great job. And you can tell, I want to thank Jason. I want to thank Mary Marker. You've heard from Mary before, but another round of applause for Mary and everyone who's working so hard on this. You know, I was listening to an interview this morning with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was talking. They were saying, you know, the polls are tightening. There's a Gallup poll that shows Romney's ahead now, and she said, you know what? We've been organizing in every community around this country. While the Republicans have been having their primary, we've been organizing and getting focused, and that's why I kind of chuckled when Jason made each of you pull out those sheets, because it's critical, it's important. This is not going to be easy, but we're going to win it because of this kind of an organization. And again, I want to thank everyone who's been working so hard, volunteering. I know we've been phone banking and doing a lot of work leading up to this. And frankly, when I walked in around maybe 7:20, and I saw every seat filled, and people said that some of you got here around 6:30, 6:15. It warms my heart, and I know that we have the backbone and the group that's going to make this happen. And so I want to say thank you to every one of you in this audience, everyone sitting here today, for what you do, for what you're doing. There are a lot of other things you could be doing tonight. As my daughters reminded me when I was leaving the house earlier, when I stopped them for dinner, they said, American Idol's on tonight, are you going to be home in time? I said, I got something more important tonight, even than American Idol, can you believe it? But on a personal note, before I just say a few words about Howard County and then introduce the congressman, I really want to say thank you to everyone here for your, I guess I'm assuming, but for your support of me. You know, I want you to know that, I know we probably don't agree on every issue in this room, but I want you to know that I'm fighting every day to continue to make sure that Howard County embraces our shared values of diversity, acceptance, and opportunity for everyone, while we continue to embrace innovative solutions to our challenges. And I hear from folks who aren't happy sometimes at what I'm putting forward, and I've got a budget that'll go forward in just a couple days. I'm sure not everyone will love that. But I just want you to know that when I look around this room, I know it's the folks in this room that give me the backbone to continue to fight for our shared values. And so I want to say thank you. You know, from a political standpoint, I remember when I started working in Maryland politics, I was working for Governor Glendening, and I remember it was all about looking at the state of Maryland at the 3 Democratic jurisdictions, and that's all there were. There was Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and Baltimore City in a statewide election. And if you remember that first election, he lost Howard County to Ellen Sauerbrey and then won it 4 years later. Howard County in those days was a swing county. Howard County is now and will continue to be a solid blue Democratic county because of the folks in this room. And that's why almost every seat, right, Byron? Byron represented a major victory of a statewide office holder as our Register of Wills just this past election. But that's why Howard County is so important. You're so important. We are so important in a statewide race. When it comes to races like the one that Ben Cardin's going to have in the fall, when it comes to some of the statewide bills, some statewide referendum, both the DREAM Act and marriage equality, which I'm personally supporting both, and hope you all are too. When it comes to making sure that we send back John Sarbanes and Elijah Cummings and now Dutch Ruppersberger representing part of Howard County, you are incredibly important to that effort. And Jason talked about the role that we play in Howard County, the role that we played 4 years ago, not just in Maryland for Barack Obama, but around the country. Folks know Maryland around the country. They know how many phone calls you made to states around here. They know how many phone calls you made as the hours got later, and they gave us new lists of Nevada and New Mexico, and just started, you know, okay, it's too late to call into the Midwest, let's keep calling on the West Coast. They know that was you. And again, I want to say thank you. I also want you to just from my perspective, what it means to be county executive with a president and a Congress that shares our values, and what it would mean differently. And I was thinking, I get to talk about all the time about our accolades in Howard County, and I wouldn't be able to make one of my speeches without, again, saying that we were named the 2nd best place to live in America by CNN and Money Magazine. Again, I have no love for Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Don't ever want to go. Don't care. Don't believe it. And I got a bunch of Eden Prairie jokes that I'll save for the moment. But it's true. I'm really proud of the work that we've done together, whether it be in our schools, where Forbes ranked as the 7th best in the country, our library system for the last 5 years, the best system in the country, and now with the new Miller branch, that was before the Miller branch opened, and we've got a lot of additional work. I just put $5 million in the budget to completely gut and renovate the Savage branch and turn it into to uplift the Savage branch, and we're doing more work. Sports Illustrated named our recreation and park system the best in the Mid-Atlantic and one of the top 8 in the country. And that was before Blandare opened a few weeks ago, just around the corner from here. By the way, if you haven't been to Blandare, please go take a look at phase 1. But here's what I wanted to say. When it comes to the areas of focus that we've been able to make progress in, let's take healthcare. Healthcare, with Dr. Peter Bielensen's leadership and our vision and values rooted in my brother's experience as a 3-time cancer survivor, and the fact that he's only with us because we had health insurance and early detection, and without having access to doctors, he wouldn't be with us. And so with that motivating us, we set out and we created Healthy Howard. Only San Francisco and Howard County essentially have a universal health care plan. And I didn't want to have to do it because we were waiting for our nation to act. Now that our nation acted, we were in transition mode. We were in transition mode of how we're transitioning Healthy Howard into a day in January 1, 2014, when everyone has to have health insurance, and how we make that transition. Now, with this Supreme Court that we have, with this Supreme Court that we wish we didn't have, that's contemplating in June throwing out the mandate, we're trying to figure out, okay, I mean, these are big issues that, it's important that we make progress as a county, but we can't solve it at the county level. These are issues that can only be solved at our nation's level. And so you think about, what does it mean to have a president who gets to appoint a Supreme Court? What does it mean to have a president who, despite angry town halls and opposition, says, you know what, it's the right thing to do to guarantee access to every American? What do we do if we don't have a Congress led by people like Barney Frank, who you're going to hear in just a moment, who fight for those values? And we've also been working hard in the environment. We put more money into stormwater management than we ever have over the last 2 years. We're moving forward with a stormwater utility, so we have a dedicated fund. We have a cleaner fleet in Howard County than any county in Maryland. We, your blue recycling bins, now we're going to be the first, we are the first in the East Coast to have once a week curbside food waste pickup in 1,000 homes in Elkridge as a pilot right now. And as soon as we get more composting facilities nearby, we'll be expanding that around. But we can't save the Chesapeake Bay as one county. We need leadership of Ben Cardin back in the Senate and our delegation, and we need a president who understands that the Chesapeake Bay is a national resource and puts the resources in to help us do that. When it comes to innovation, I talk about our broadband plan. When the federal government came out with the Recovery Act, they put $7 billion aside for broadband high-speed internet connectivity. We pulled together 10 jurisdictions from Harford County down through Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Montgomery, Carroll, and Frederick, and we're managing the biggest municipal broadband system, the public sector cloud. We're under construction with 1,300 miles of fiber connecting every public school, library, police station, fire station, university, community college in this region, then leasing out the fiber to the private sector, becoming the most wired state in the country to support the economic development of our state, opportunities for children all over the state of Maryland, all over the region. You might have seen the signs, we're under construction. I can tell you we're plugging in. We plugged in Talbot Springs Elementary School just today, I believe. So this is right around the corner. This only happens when you have a president and a Congress led by Barney Frank that says, you know what, we're willing to take tough votes to wire our country for the future to be able to create jobs and provide opportunities for children all over our country and in underserved communities and rural communities. And all of that gets turned back. All that gets turned back in starting in 201 days unless we stand up together and stand up like we did 4 years ago. That's why walking in and seeing all these faces, many of you I know worked hard 4 years ago. Many of you weren't here 4 years ago and weren't a part of this and are part of this now. And again, I say thank you. And so I pledge to be with you for the next 201 days because again, we in Howard County, we in Maryland can only make progress toward our shared values with a president and a Congress who are on the same page. And we have one now, and we need to work tirelessly to keep them that. So, you didn't come to hear me. You came, although you had to, I apologize. So again, let me just say thank you for what you do to make Howard County the second best place to live in America. And with that, a man who needs very little introduction, but one of my personal heroes for many things, is, I am tired of Democrats that don't speak up loudly and fight back and tell like it is. I for one am proud that we stand up and fight for investing in our neighbors and investing in our children and our shared values. And I like Democrats who stand up and say, this is why I'm voting this way. It's the right thing to do. And that's what Barney Frank has done throughout his career. He's one of the smartest men in Washington, one of the smartest people in Washington, one of the true fighters for our shared values. I can tell you that he's done wonders not only for his district in Massachusetts, but as a leader throughout this country. And the fact that he would come to Columbia, Maryland tonight to get us focused and fired up and ready to go to re-elect Barack Obama is a testimony of his leadership. Congressman Barney Frank.
I am very happy to see this turnout because the election is going to be a tough one because of the flood of money that's going to be coming at us. And it's going to be very hard to meet it dollar for dollar. But we don't have to meet it dollar for dollar. We have to stay within the same order of magnitude and then make up for it for this kind of turnout. So I am very pleased to come. Ted Hart's a good friend, and he's the one who asked me to come and told me that there would be this kind of enthusiastic turnout, and I'm glad to do it. Let me begin by saying I'm about to make a speech which will be telling you things that you already believe in. There is this phrase that says you're not supposed to preach to the converted. People denigrate preaching to the converted, but that is really very unfair to members of the clergy, which is what they do most of the time. When we preach to the converted, we have a lot more unemployed people on Sunday or Saturday or whenever people would be preaching. What I think that I'm doing, since I do this kind of work day to day, is to address a group of people who are going to be out there fighting, trying to give you the ammunition you need. That is, I hope to be able to build on what you already know, what you already believe, with some of the specifics that will be helpful. I started today, by the way, in a very good frame of mind after I got to go and saw the New York Times. And it's something which is emblematic of this election. Yesterday, the shareholders in Citicorp voted for the first time to demand a reduction in the pay of the top executives. The Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and other papers noted not only was that important in itself, but it clearly is an indication of what's going to be happening, and it will be an inspiration to others. The serious effort to reduce excessive compensation at the very top levels has now begun in earnest, and be very clear, as all the newspapers and TV and everybody else acknowledged, that was solely because we passed legislation in 2010, the Financial Reform Bill, over the objection of every single Republican in the House, of all but 3 Republicans in the Senate, and over Mitt Romney's objection. So, as America today learns that, yeah, you can fight back and say, no, we're not going to pay Vikram Pandit, a very able guy, $15 million, while they then say they've got to raise and dick on 9 people on the fees. That is an example of something that happened because the Democrats had the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and if the Republicans were to take over the presidency of the House and the Senate, that would disappear. So if people want a very concrete example, there it is. I spent today, in fact, in a meeting in which the Republicans also objected. In 2008, George Bush's top appointees to be financial regulators, Henry Paulson, Secretary of Treasury, Sheila Bair, the head of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and Ben Bernanke, Bush's appointee, said, you know, we have this dilemma they saw in 2008 when Lehman Brothers failed. And they didn't do anything, and it led to a terrible collapse. So then when AIG was about to fail, they said, well, we better do something. So they paid all the debts of AIG, and that wasn't a lot better from the public standpoint. And they said to us, look, you've got to get us out of this box. Give us a way to go to a financial institution that's failing and put it to death. I mean, Sarah Palin was right in part. She was half right. But that's above her average. So. She said that we had enacted death panels. in the last Congress. We did have death panels, but they are for big banks, not old ladies. We said if a financial institution fails, we will abolish it. We will wipe out the shareholders. We will fire the people in charge. But we can't always simply let all the debts go without some kind of payment with Lehman Brothers. So we gave them the right to pay only as many of the debts as are needed to prevent contagion. But we said, unlike in 2008, it won't come from the taxpayers. If the Treasury Department feels it has to do some of this to prevent this kind of contagion of the people who didn't pay, not paying, and others not paying, etc., then the Secretary of the Treasury is ordered under the current law that we passed in 2010 to recover that money from financial institutions, and not from your neighborhood bank or credit union, from financial institutions that have more than $50 billion in assets, or hedge funds with more than $10 billion in assets. And that was something that the Republican leadership, Secretary Hank Paulson, George Bush Secretary of the Treasury, in his portrait, which he gets to put up in the Treasury Department, he gets to write what it says about him. He took some credit, deservedly, for some of the reforms we have in this financial reform bill. I spent today debating the Republicans who moved to abolish it all. Who moved, believe it or not, to go right back to 2008. That's, if you will remember that. And they also specifically said that they don't want the financial institutions to have to pay anything. So we offered an amendment that said, if we have to spend some money in a case like we did in 2008, out of prudence, it will be paid for by an immediate levy on financial institutions over $50 billion in assets and hedge funds over $10 billion in assets. And on a pretty straight party line vote, that was defeated. They voted not to make the banks pay anything. They also voted, by the way, to further try to weaken the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is an absolute epitome of the differences. They are very angry that for the first time in American history, thanks to the legislation that President Obama asked us to do and that we were able to put through, consumer protection in the financial area is now on a par with other regulation. And they hate that and they want to dismantle it. This is a very interesting time. I was originally going to be an academic. I was studying political science in graduate school. I was back and forth with politics, and I made a very important decision that I would be a politician and not an academic. Based on what I tell young people, I don't give young people a lot of advice because they really don't care, but I have one thing that I would say with regard to job choice. If you can't always control it, but to the extent that you can find a job which plays to your strengths and not your weaknesses, take it. In other words, someone say, oh no, I'm not so good at this, so I'm gonna force myself to get better. In my experience, while self-improvement is a lofty ideal, you cannot live with a gun pointed at your own head. Whether it's the exercise or the diet, you want to do something fine, but don't try to force yourself for the rest of your life. It's like that scene in Blazing Saddles, where wants the gun himself to get away from all the racists. It's not going to happen. Well, I found that I have one, you said go with your strength and not your weakness. I have one personal characteristic that is a strength in some contexts and a weakness in others. To try to be an academic, to write a PhD thesis, which I originally set out to do, this characteristic is kind of a weakness. On the other hand, to be a member of a legislative body, it's a great strength. It's a short attention span. We have some of the delegates here who come to others. You really need it. And but when I was an academic, I studied a lot about democracy and politics. Let me make a very clear-cut statement. There's never been a time in American life when one of the major political parties has been so dominated by a rigid group of ideological extremists far from the center of America, with one exception, and that was the Democratic Party before the Civil War, when it became a remnant of Southern races, and of course helped lead to the breakup of the country. Now, these aren't people who have slaves, and these aren't people who are going to start a shooting war. but they are as far from the center of American thought, tradition, rules, as it is possible to be. Look, we have problems, and I mentioned 2008, and we had that crisis in 2008, and it led to the worst economic crisis in 80 years. And what people, of course, don't always want to remember, the Republicans try to forget, is that Barack Obama inherited the worst economy in America since 1932. In fact, I know that there are among the Republicans creationists, people who believe that the world began, I don't know, 6,000 years ago. But it turns out that Republicans in Congress have a much shorter. They believe that the American economy began on January 21st, 2009. Nothing ever happened before that. It all happened on the day. My husband-to-be, Jim, said that they have it was a mass disease outbreak, widespread amnesia in the Republican Party. So they blame Barack Obama. Now, we inherited that troubled economy, and I fault the president one thing, which he was trying hard to work with these Republicans. I will be honest and say, I told them it wasn't going to work. I know you're supposed to say, oh, I don't like to say I told you so. I not only like to say I told you so, I have found that it is one of the few pleasures that I can say I told you so without taking any medication before. But Barack Obama, to his credit, said, no, I'm going to work with these people. I'm going to be post-partisan. People say, oh, they forget how hard he tried and how they took advantage of him. I knew these people. I've been working with them. And I said, you know, when he said he was going to be post-partisan, the one difference I had with him back then in 2008, and I told some of his people, when he talked about being post-partisan, given what I knew was the tenor of these people, how are you going to be post-partisan with Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, who said, my number one goal is to defeat the President of the United States. Not to help the country, not to support the economy, to defeat the President of the United States, and of course by making things bad to do it. But when you talk about being post-partisan with those people, I told them, he gave me post-partisan depression. We made things, our collective effort improves things. You know, you can be very proud of that. I mean, the Maryland congressional delegation, obviously with some of the real leaders of the country, Barbara Mikulski, that great leader of feminism, and Ben Cardin was going on STEM. John Sarbanes, who, as I left tonight, asked me to please give you his regards, and John's been a great member, as was his father, who I had a chance to work with when we did Sarbanes-Oxley. There's a great group, what Dutch does on intelligence, all very important. Working together, we improved the situation very much. But we had a political problem in 2010. What we did was to inherit a terrible situation and do things that made it better. But we made it better by making it less bad. That was the problem. And you don't get rewarded in politics by going to people and saying, you know, things have been really terrible, and thanks to me, they're now only bad. And they're getting better. There's a great chart. You want to go to the library? You can get a great library right here on the current semi-annual report of the Federal Reserve on the economy. They have one chart on unemployment, and it starts in 2006. And it shows unemployment, the number of jobs lost every month, sharply going up. In other words, the number goes down and down and down every month. And then in March in 09, it turns around. And beginning in March in 09, after we passed the Economic Recovery Act, etc., it gets better. Now the problem is it is getting better all during 09 into 10. But what getting better means is that we are losing fewer and fewer jobs every month. So by any economist, it's great. It's what economists will explain. It's a very important. It's a V-shaped curve. That means it went sharply one way and it's going sharply the other. But while we were making improvement, we were improving a bad situation. And the public doesn't reward you for that. I was so frustrated because I'd obviously been a part of this as chairman of the Financial Services Committee. By the way, that's another example. The Republicans tell all these terrible things that happened Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, et cetera, et cetera. The Republicans controlled the Congress from 1995 to 2007. All they did was let things get worse. We began to turn it around in 2007, but it was too late at that point to deal with preventing the crisis. We helped make it better, as I said, but that's the problem. It's not a good political platform to go forward and say, hey, look how much better I made things. And I said, you can have a bumper sticker in 2010, but it didn't seem like it was working well. Things would have sucked worse without it. But we have one this year, because I have not been 100% supporter of President Obama, and this is one of the things, let me start with this now. You can have some friends to the left and some others who will be dissatisfied because he has not done everything. And I will tell you this, I understand their frustration because I know what a good feeling it is to vote for a perfect candidate. It's a rare experience to vote for someone you know is absolutely perfect, who does everything right, and you can count on to make no mistakes. And I once voted for a perfect candidate. By the time I ran for re-election, that wasn't But I looked at my record and I decided I was still the best candidate in that race, so I would say that about Barack Obama. He's been excellent. I have a couple of differences with him. But that's where we are. And the public still, we have, again, the situation has improved by every metric by significant amounts. But people will say, well, it's not perfect. And I'm ready to concede that. And so I have a bumper sticker this year. I am going to print up, although I'm not running myself. And I understand that, we don't always do everything we'd like to be able to do. But you look at this group of extreme ideologues who can't even get the votes among themselves to pass a highway bill, the most basic, previously non-controversial government function, and they can't get that passed. So I'm going to have a bumper sticker. Invite to my office later and I'll get it to you. We're not perfect, but they're nuts. You heard about the Ryan budget. The Ryan budget is not simply, they say, it's cutting the deficit. Well, more than that, it's shifting how we spend rather than simply reducing it. And one example of that is that the Ryan budget undoes some of the effort the president has made to put restraints on defense, and I do even more to cut. But the Ryan budget repudiates the notion of restraining defense spending so that it can further reduce Medicare and Medicaid. And don't take my word for it. I've just quoted for you an editorial in support of the Ryan budget from the Wall Street Journal 3 weeks ago. You go to the Wall Street Journal, it's last Tuesday in March, and the Wall Street Journal says, good for Paul Ryan. He stops these cuts in defense, and he instead gets those savings from Medicare and Medicaid. Let me talk about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. Yeah, I think we can make some efficiencies, but the notion that that's the major place where you go for cuts, that you continue, and by the way, if I were in charge, I would reduce military spending even more. But the Republicans want to repeat the mistake George Bush made. George Bush came to office and inherited a surplus, and promptly got into 2 wars and had 5 tax cuts. Now, I voted for one of those wars, Afghanistan, I voted against the other, but never in American history have we gone to war twice while cutting taxes. And now they want to do it again. The Republicans say, no, we want to reduce taxes further. Let's go to war in Syria. Let's stay in Afghanistan longer. They are for more military intervention. Let's intervene in Iran even before it looks like things may be working in terms of sanctions there. So this is where they are, and that's yet. Instead, they say we're going to have to do this with Social Security and Medicare. They're right. If you do not raise taxes, and Ryan's not for raising taxes, he's shifting, he said. Hold the revenue level even, because he's very clear about where he would cut. He's totally unclear about what he would do to plug the loophole. But what he would do would be to hold tax revenues where they are, maybe slightly reduce them, significantly increase military spending, and get the deficit down. There's only one way you do that. If you hold tax revenues neutral and you increase military spending, then you have to go after every program we have to improve the quality of our lives here at home, savagely, as he does, as the Republicans do, and you have to go after Social Security and Medicare. Let's be very clear. Social Security and Medicare are two of the great accomplishments of America in the 20th century. Under Democratic presidents, over Republican opposition in both cases. And before Social Security and even until Medicare, for most older people, certainly before Social Security, if you weren't rich and you got old, you were going to be poor. The possibility of a middle class existence for older people didn't exist. And we took the first step towards that with Social Security, and we completed it with Medicare. Not a case of luxury, but of a decent existence. They want to get rid of that. There is nothing we do to improve the quality of our lives that they are not trying to dismantle. And that's clearly where we are. We understand that there are going to have to be some constraints in domestic spending. By the way, unemployment numbers. The Republican myth is that the public sector has strangled the private sector. In fact, a couple of things are clear. First of all, the economic recovery plan was very helpful. There were very few economists who don't acknowledge that unemployment is substantially lower than it would have been if we hadn't done that. Yep. By the way, I'm being very loyal as a Democrat. I called it the economic recovery plan, not the stimulus plan. I was calling it the stimulus, where they have these focus groups. I've never been involved with them, or had them, but I guess in my life I keep encountering unfocused groups. But the focus groups, they said, they like the phrase Recovery Act better than stimulus, which I will tell you puzzled me, because in my experience, most people would rather be stimulated than recover. It clearly improved the economy. And we have, since Barack Obama became president, created close to 4 million private sector jobs, 3.7, 3.8 million. Unemployment has not gone down as much as it might have, because we have also at the same time, thanks to Republican policies, reduced public sector employment by over 600,000 jobs. If public employment had not been reduced, not if it had increased at the same rate as the private sector, if it had stayed the same, if we hadn't had to fire teachers and firefighters and social workers and police officers and people who maintain the parks and public works employees, if the municipalities and states and counties hadn't been forced to fire these people, these weren't federal employees on the whole law, then unemployment would be well under 8% today. So the reality is the opposite of the Republican myth. Oh, the private sector is being choked by the public sector. No, the public sector is doing very well. It's the private sector is now beginning to prosper. It is the public sector that is hurting and is being held back. And of course, the Republican answer is, oh no, but those aren't real jobs. Public sector spending doesn't help the economy, except, of course, if it's the military. So the war in Afghanistan, good for the economy. Police officers on the streets in Maryland, bad for the economy. That's the Republican analysis. But that's where we are. Again, there are legitimate differences people have, but the extremism is enormous. And then, of course, we have the U.S. Supreme Court. Leaving aside health care, these are the people who brought us the most significant threat to our democracy that we have seen since the Civil War. Now, I believe we're going to survive it, but it is a major check to democracy, and that's, of course, the notion that money is unlimited in political campaigns. We have two principles in our society. We have a private sector, the capitalist system, which runs with inequality. It has to. Inequality is not a bad thing, it's a necessary thing. Excessive inequality becomes damaging economically and socially. But the economic system runs on the principle of inequality. The more money you have, the more money you can make, the more you're going to inflate, you're going to have on resources. But the political system runs on equality, one person, one vote. What the Supreme Court of the United States has done is to allow the principle of inequality of the private sector to overwhelm the equality principle of the public sector. What does one man, one vote mean when one other man has $1 billion and can spend it without limit? And they say, oh, that's necessary for democracy. Well, that's true. This American exceptionalism they talk about is even greater than I thought. Because if spending money in an unlimited way is the hallmark of a democracy, then we're the only democracy that ever existed in the history of the world. because nobody else had to do this, including America. Well, that's up for grabs, the Supreme Court of the United States. And then we have some of the issues still remaining with equality for LGBT people, and I am delighted you are here. I am looking forward to the people of Maryland showing that equality is alive and well here, and passing everywhere same-sex marriage has taken place, after it has been in existence for a year or more, the opposition dissipates because reality beats prejudice. And there is not one thing that they have alleged was going to happen as a result of same-sex marriage. As I've said in Massachusetts, we've had it since 2004. If you are a heterosexual living in Massachusetts, the fact that people of the same sex can now get married has had no impact on your life whatsoever, unless you live across the street with a couple of women and you got to buy them a wedding present. I say women, by the way, because disproportionately the marriages have been between women, not men. It used to be this, joke among comedians back in the 20th century. Men didn't want to get married and women did, and it was never something that could be proven until you got same-sex marriage. But that's the Supreme Court. I will go back, people, and again, I tell you this to the people on, well, Obama this and that, he didn't do everything. Yeah, the last time we heard that, of course, was about Al Gore. And as a result, we have the most right-wing Supreme Court in American history, possibly, and it could get worse. All these decisions that happened because George Bush was able to appoint Alito and Roberts and give the right wing that enormous boost. So the subject figure, by the way, let me add one other issue here. I'm Jewish. I do a lot of campaigning among other Jewish groups. I make the case for Israel, by the way, as a liberal. One of the things that I'm very proud to have been able to do during the debate on Don't Ask, Don't Tell was when people told me that if you have openly gay and lesbian people in the military, it's going to destroy coherence. Respond, that's the first time I ever heard anybody accuse the Israeli Defense Forces of being ineffective. Openly gay people there, and in fact, 3 chiefs of state in American history have said pro-gay things from the roster of the U.S. House of Representatives, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Benjamin Netanyahu, but let me address that. The greatest victory, one of the few victories Israel has had in the United Nations since the original resolution of '48, came when the UN refused to adopt the resolution declaring Palestinian statehood. Now, if you want to go back and look a year ago, you will see that there was a real fear that that was going to happen, and that America would have to veto it, and it would be the rest of the world against Israel and America, and Israel would have been in a very uncomfortable position of staying this off only because of American veto, the way Syria was with regard to Russia and China. And the American administration went to work to lobby at the UN. And thanks to the extraordinary diplomatic efforts of President Obama, Secretary Clinton, and their team, they couldn't even get a majority for that resolution. It was an enormous diplomatic victory for Israel and an unexpected one. And Barack Obama had the credibility to do that precisely because he had said he thought the settlement policy should change. In other words, what people have said is, oh, Obama was hostile to Israel. It was a very thoughtful statement, one I agreed with about the settlements, one that many people in Israel agree with, but one which was essential to Obama then being able to go and say, look, I don't like the settlement policy the way it is. I'd like to get it changed some and not have the settlements be where they are and bring them in some. But that doesn't mean you're in Israel. And that, as I said again, think about it, it was the biggest victory Israel had gotten in a long time. And Obama is now very much, and we're beginning to get some progress with regard to the Iranians. I will tell you this again. When Obama took office, I was asked if I would meet with some Israeli security people, and they had one request that President Obama continue in the Treasury Committee that I was chairing, a jurisdiction over it. The man named Stuart Levy, who was in charge of sanctions and fighting terrorism, and Obama did that, and he's been very successful. So I cannot think of an area where the values that we care about are not going to be at risk if the Republicans win everything. And again, the extremism is overwhelming. As far as Mitt Romney is concerned, I think the best example of it is he attacked Rick Santorum because Santorum had voted 5 times to raise the debt limit. That was like attacking someone for going outside wearing his clothes. That is, for not being insane. Santorum did that because Ronald Reagan asked him to, because that was basic common sense. Mitt Romney has been so willing to embrace the right, and this notion that he's going to work his way back, no, he's committed to these people, he's locked in. And so it's a very, very sharp distinction between a very thoughtful, very able, progressive, who has been very successful in the economic area, successful in the foreign policy area, in improving things and working with what he got, and the most extreme right-winger. At this point, I would tell you, I think Mitt Romney is more extreme in the positions he takes vis-a-vis the rest of the country than Barry Goldwater was in 1964. And I am glad you're all here, because I think we should look to that same result, and I hope you will. Not just be here, but yeah, Maryland's in good shape. You got friends all over the country. You got phone calls to make. You got money to raise. There's a great deal you can do sitting here in Maryland. It's analogous to us in Massachusetts to help us win this thing, and I look forward to you doing it. Thank you. Now we'll take some questions.
Thank you very much. The first question, hold the way. Yeah, okay. Is why don't the Democrats talk more about their achievements in the last 3.5 years?
Well, it was hard to do at first. Frankly, for the first 2 years, when people were still in a bad mood, it was hard to do. I think you see that we are doing more of it now. I began this now with financial reform. Some of it is because it takes a while to take effect, but the answer is we have been doing that, and the President's been doing that for some time. The second thing is the media. I know you're sophisticated and you understand you can't equate what you hear or read with what we say. I mean, the media is very selective, and they do believe, bad news is news. If you look at, for instance, and I do this, I look at the every week they will list the people who are on the Sunday morning TV talk shows. They're overwhelmingly Republican. I have a couple of administration people, because opposition is how they live. But you are seeing more of this now. Part of it was, well, first of all, we didn't have the accomplishments until we did some of them. The administration did make one mistake that I regret. Christina Roman, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, said if we passed the recovery bill, unemployment would drop below 8%. There was never any reason to say that. Never set a bar for yourself. Clearly, unemployment is much lower than it would have been. The problem, of course, was that the situation was worse than they had realized. So the improvement was as great, but not by as much. Although, again, some people have said, well, the recovery, the stimulus was too small. Sure it was, but it was $80 billion less than it should have been, because 3 Republican senators wouldn't vote for it unless it was reduced. So you can't blame the president for not being bigger when the 3 Republican Senate votes we needed to get to 60 at that time made it less even than it was.
The next question is, can we take back the House in the next election?
Yes, it's going to be a hard fight. You have money coming in, which is going to be a big factor. Ironically, London's attacking it, and I want this to work, but I believe President Obama is going to be clearly winning this thing. In 1996, when it became clear that Bill Clinton was beating Bob Dole, they shifted a lot of their money and effort into the congressional race. So we've got to be ready for that and take none of it for granted. It is clear that the Democrats will gain in the House. There's been some redistricting shenanigans, although we've shenaniganized ourselves a little bit. If it weren't for the money, I would be very confident. As of now, I am hopeful, and it is worth fighting, because I think it is a very real possibility.
2 questions related to health care. One, do you have a prediction on what the Supreme Court will do with the health care bill? And tied to that, is there a better approach we can take to getting universal health care?
Well, first, there's no point in making a prediction. I don't know. And not an operational thing to do, and if we work ourselves in either one way or the other. But the one thing is clear is that if the Supreme Court were to say that this has to go, and obviously I'm not expecting that, I don't hope it, but then the Republicans' job becomes harder because they can't just say no to this, they got to talk about something else. As far as universal health care is concerned, the best way was to do what we did. I think universal health care is clearly the preferable way. I think Medicare for everybody would have worked well. By the way, there is this suspicion of government medicine that's clearly unfounded. The most popular form of medicine in America, with the people who receive it, is of course the medicine at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And if you wanted to use the phrase socialized medicine, I guess that's what that would be. If you are a veteran, you can go to a government hospital, and a government doctor puts you in a government bed, and a government nurse sticks a needle in you, you get government pills, and government employees take care of you and take care of the building grounds. Like Rick Santorum's family. Rick Santorum grew up with his father working for the VA and VA housing on the grounds of the VA. But you still have this objection. What I'm saying though is that the way to have done that, and we came close to reducing the Medicare age to 55, and Joe Weedman inexplicably turned around on us on that, and it was damaging. But I think if the health care bill is allowed to go into effect, it's going to be like same-sex marriage. Within 3 or 4 years, all of the negative predictions will have been disproven. All of the fears will have gone away. At that point, if it has been successful, and people appreciate it and enjoy it, we can say, see, having this government role wasn't bad, why don't we take the next step and go to Medicare? Because remember, and you're right, it's universal health care. It's not government doctors, it is the government financing system. So the answer is we did the best we could. If the health care plan is able to go into effect, easy prediction, it will be very popular within a few years, and it will be a base on which we might go further with the support of the American people.
Okay. Amen. 2 questions.
I don't hear that often.
2 questions related to the financial meltdown and the Dodd-Frank bill. One, what additional legislation is needed to prevent the kind of financial meltdown we saw in 2008? And would the, I'm drawing a blank on what I've seen before this, the legislation that separated banking and investment banking.
Glass-Steagall. First, we have, we got almost everything we wanted. I regretted, we lost out a little bit because some of the more moderate Democrats, I wanted to undo completely the ruling of the Bush administration in 2004, whereby the national bank regulators canceled out any state bank consumer protections. But we've undone that to some extent by having a good national consumer protector. Beyond that, if President Obama is reelected and can continue these regulators in place, we will be in very good shape to prevent what had happened in the past and try to anticipate the future. The biggest single problem we have right now is that the Republicans have underfunded, in particular, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. It is the agency that's in charge of derivatives. It is the agency that says we don't want speculation in oil. They did something very controversial. They put out, thanks to our bill, we gave them the power to do it, they didn't have it before. They basically said, if you never go near a barrel of oil, if you've never seen one, you've never touched one, and you don't want to associate with one, please stop buying them and holding them off the market until their price goes up so you can sell it and make a profit. It's called position limits. We got that adopted and the industry took it to court. And they said, oh, Congress didn't mean that. I got every Democrat who'd been a member of the conference committee, we just signed an amicus brief to go to court. And it's a very simple amicus brief legally. They said Congress did not intend it, and it's an amicus brief that says, yeah, we did. But, so the answer is, if it's well enforced, we will have it done. As to Glass-Steagall, Glass-Steagall was passed in 1931. It did not do anything about derivatives. I never heard of it. It didn't do anything about one of the biggest single causes of the problem, securitized loans. A lot of people here, you bought your first house, you got a loan from a bank, and you paid that bank back every month. But if you got a loan 10 years ago, you almost certainly got a loan from somebody who gave you the loan and then immediately sold that loan in a package to other people. Now, if I give you a loan and I'm waiting for you to pay me back, I'm going to frisk you pretty good before I give you the loan. If I'm going to give you the loan and sell it to some other poor sucker, not so much. And people bought these packages of loans and didn't know what was in them. And people said, well, how do I know it's a good loan? Well, you know how they know it was a good loan to buy? Who told them that these packages of loans were good? The rating agencies. The rating agencies, which were paid by the people who were selling the loans to tell you it was a good thing to buy. And the rating agencies were a disaster. So again, Glass-Steagall wouldn't have done anything about that. It's hard to show that the lack of Glass-Steagall did any problems. Having said that, I did vote against the repeal of Glass-Steagall. And what Glass-Steagall says is, you don't want a bank which is supposed to be more steady because it's got insured deposits by the federal government doing risky things. The modern equivalent of Glass-Steagall is what's called the Volcker Rule, named for Paul Volcker, which the banks and the Republicans together hate. And the Volcker Rule says, if you are a bank, you cannot engage in risky and speculative activities on your own. You can do them if a customer wants you to do it with his or her money, but you can't do it with the bank's money, because if you do it with the bank's money, you're going to cause us problems. That's a large part of Glass-Steagall. But beyond that, as I said, we did a number of things that would not have been resolved by Glass-Steagall. And the AIG was not the kind of hybrid that existed only because of Glass-Steagall. Lehman Brothers was not. So we did take the principle of Glass-Steagall of trying to calm things down, but it was greatly modernized. And I'd say finally, to the extent that there is still some impact on that separation, it's being done by the Volcker Rule.
From one of the younger attendees, they asked if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Well, it's a minor one and a major one. The minor superpower would be the ability to predict which line would move faster. That would be a great power to have. And the major one would be to have 2 days in the week in which I could eat whatever I wanted and it wouldn't affect my weight.
Wants to know if President Obama should succumb to the pressure on environmental issues such as offshore drilling.
Well, he should not succumb to pressures and do it where it's inappropriate. I think there are places where offshore drilling can make sense if it is done with the right safeguards. By the way, there are some important economic interests against it. Now, offshore drilling is very unpopular with conservatives in Florida because tourism is so important to them. I represent the largest fishing port by volume of catch in America, the city of New Bedford, Massachusetts, where Moby Dick was started. And these people are very angry about any potential of drilling offshore there because it would ruin our fishing industry. But I think if we did the proper safeguards, that offshore drilling is there are places where you could drill offshore if you did it in ways that had all these environmental requirements. But clearly there are places that would be inappropriate, and there would be places that there were ways in which people weren't safeguarded. The final point is, if we're going to do offshore drilling, we are allowing private sector entities to go drill where they do not own it, since they can't own the ocean. We make sure they pay far more adequately than they paid in the past.
2 questions concerning voter suppression. One, what can we do to keep states from preventing people to vote? And the second is the long lines and long waits in inner cities such as Cleveland in 2004 compared to easy voting in a place like this, a case of unequal protection.
Right. 2 things. First of all, you get back to the Supreme Court. Among the terrible decisions of the Supreme Court was to allow blatant voter suppression and to pretend it had nothing to do with race. disingenuous and damaging, and that's problematic. The Justice Department's got to keep going after it and keep trying. As to the second point, that's our fault. I mean, the Republicans weren't in charge of Cleveland. Now, here's part of the problem, I hope we correct it. I went to work for the mayor of Boston in 1968. I campaigned for him in 67. He took office January 1, 1968. A man named Kevin White. He was very careful about appointing good people to positions. He wanted the best corporation counsel, the best public works commissioner, worked hard to get a good police commissioner. There was some problems with it. But he had some throwaway jobs for political people who weren't necessarily all that good. Running the election commission was considered to be one of them. So that we have not put enough money into election administration. You go to vote, and who is in charge of the polling place, and it's been there since 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to be 9 o'clock at night. Some 82-year-old lady who's working for $5 and a cup of coffee. And that we should be paying a lot of money and trying to get people to volunteer, first-rate people. The other problem is in some of the big cities, there was a conflict between their desire to see a president elected and their desire to stay in power. And there were big cities in which getting a lot of new people to vote, young people and others, wasn't considered very desirable. So we ought to be insisting in those cities where people who say they agree with the Democrats are in power, that they got to do a much better job of improving elections and putting a lot more money into election administration. We'll still have the voter suppression issue, and that's a problem. You fight politically. In some states, we're not going to be able to win it, and the Supreme Court isn't there to overturn it. In Maine, by the way, they had a Republican governor who got elected because there was a split among two liberals, or between two liberals, and you got a Republican legislature in the bad year of 2010, and they adopted some voter suppression stuff, and the people of Maine took it to a referendum and overturned it. So that may be the way to do it in some cases. But the Cleveland situation, that's our fault. We have to insist that Democratic mayors and Democratic officials, county officials, put aside any temptation to restrict the electorates in their own defense and get out there.
A question that's related to what you were quoted on yesterday in a lot of the papers. How can the Democrats more effectively communicate the link between healthcare reform and economic progress?
It's hard. The problem was, and as I said, I think we made a mistake doing it right away. It's always controversial. It's the same with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had that same problem. People get very nervous about their health care. And there's a natural instinct to say, oh no, I'm okay, don't change it. The biggest mistake we made was to do it while we were still fighting the recession. Now, part of the problem was, I understand this, is a little bit of hindsight. We didn't realize how bad the economy was. But people are least willing to take risks when they're worried about their jobs and everything else. And I think the answer was we should have just sequenced it better. Now the way we'll prove the link is this, and again, if the Supreme Court does not throw it out, what will happen will be that the economy will be improving just as the health care bill is in place. It's not necessarily causal, but guilt by association sometimes hurts you, but innocence by association can help you. So the health care bill suffered in popular view because it was launched during this bad economic time. It will benefit because if it's allowed to survive by the Supreme Court, it will prosper, and people will start getting all these benefits, like the no limit on lifetime coverage, no restriction because of certain conditions, fully getting their children on, and the reduction in the amount that old people have to pay under Part D. Those benefits will become clearer. But the timing was different.
Last question. What will be the major attack line of the GOP against President Obama, and how do we respond to it?
Well, it's not clear. It depends on the economy. Just before we left for a 2-week break, the newspapers that cover Capitol Hill, the Hill, local, Politico, were reporting that a number of Republicans in Congress were trying to figure out how to take credit for the clearly improving economy. They said they were going to say that it was because they didn't do anything. If the economy were to go into reverse or stay flat, that would be the attack. I do not believe that's going to happen. Among other things, by the way, the Obama administration deserves credit for, and it had to be done over the objections and obstruction of Republicans, was the role that we played in trying to help Europe avert a disaster. And it's still not great. But the extremism of the Republicans was when the Federal Reserve Bank lent money to the European Central Bank and did some dollar swaps with the European Central Bank, both of which made money for the U.S. Treasury. And the European Central Bank thus was able to play a role in averting terrible results in Europe. We're not out of the woods yet, but it clearly went better than people thought. The Republicans objected and said the Federal Reserve shouldn't have done that. One of the things we hope is that the International Monetary Fund will also help keep things from going into deterioration. The Republicans have not only said we shouldn't put any money into the IMF, by the way, we put money into the IMF over the years. It's never cost us a nickel. We put up our money, but we don't have to make good on the pledge because they make money. They want us to use our vote at the IMF to stop them from helping. But if Europe continues to stay where it is, maybe get a little better, then I believe our economy will continue to improve. At that point, they will then go after him on the deficit. Although one of the ways I would like the president to fight back, and I think he gets a little too constrained here. These are the people who want him they want him to spend much more on the military. And military spending, look at that. I voted to send people to war in Afghanistan. And I attended every funeral that I knew of anybody in my district. It was the worst days of my life to have some young person die in the war I voted for. I thought it was a necessary war of self-defense, although I think it's long since gone beyond that. But they want to spend, so when we go to war, we got to spend all the money. Obviously, you don't send people in there naked. But I would fight back about that. I think Romney is dead wrong. The American people have finally, I think, realized that Hitler's dead, Stalin's dead, communism is over. For years we worried about some threat to America's ability there were existential threats to America. They're gone. The terrorists are terrible people. And I'm glad that he got bin Laden killed. But the terrorists are not the kind of threat to our ability to survive that the communists or the Nazis were. You cannot defeat terrorism with nuclear submarines. I wish you could, because we have them and they don't have them. It would be over. It's much less expensive to fight terrorism effectively. The Republicans are on the wrong side of this. They're suffering from cultural error. Go into Syria, do more in Afghanistan. Don't give sanctions a chance to work in Iraq. They may be working. These are the issues he should fight back on. But they will go after him on the deficit. And then in some places they will go after him on some of the social issues. Not so much on gay rights, a little bit on abortion, but on this preposterous notion that he's endangering freedom of religion. They want to go after him on immigration, but that's moderated. The Republicans have learned to count in Spanish. And when they get up to about 3 million, they get a little inhibited. They've now got Senator Rubio out there with some sort of half-dream thing. So if it's not the bad economy, it will be the deficit. Their argument's been over choking off the economy. But the stock market, I'm responsible obviously for financial stuff and what we've done. From March of 2009 until today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has more than doubled. The stock market had its best quarter in I don't know how many decades, the first quarter of this year. Hard for them to argue that we ruined this entity, and the public's on our side of that. So it's either if the economy continues to improve, it'll be the deficit, and then it will be, he's too liberal and he's kind of alien, doesn't understand the economy. But again, if the economy works, I would say this, I don't know what they are going to be able to attack you on, and I do think the economy is going to be improving. Thank you, Juan. I just remember that. When you need the money, let me say, last point, I wish that the Citizens United decision had been there, but the only way we can counter their flood of money is by our money. You don't have to match the Koch brothers every dollar. But collectively, we've got to put up enough money so that we're not outspent, and Ben's not outspent, John Sarbanes and Dutch and the others, and then that seat of Delaney. We need to put up some money, and we need your effort and your energy. So thank you very much for being here.
so much for coming tonight. Thank you again, Congressman Frank, for coming. If we have any last second submissions before we go ahead and draw. We had over 200 people here tonight, which is fitting because we have 201 days left. If every person in this room shows up next week to make 50 calls, that's 10,000. All right, so also we have yard signs, Obama card yard signs available in the corner. We have bumper stickers, buttons, t-shirts. We'll go ahead and draw.
Sorry, go ahead.
Alright. So for the buttons and bumper stickers, Jim Gold. Jim? Somewhere? Alright, there's Jim. And for the Power Through Obama t-shirt, George and Shirley. Alright, thank you all.
Volunteering with us.
She's one of the 22's top picks. Some people that responded, yes, I haven't seen your face because the gender's changed. Oh, yeah, no. How are you doing? Good. All right. Like I said,
Right.